The first time I stopped, it was just to take my gloves off and tighten the strap on my watch. Nothing dramatic. I was maybe a little over an hour into the hike, in that stretch where the trail narrows between firs and the snow gets tamped down into this slick gray-white ribbon from old foot traffic and thaw-freeze cycles. I remember my own breathing sounding too loud in the cold. Not panic, just sharp, because the air had that dry bite to it and I'd been moving at a decent pace. Every little thing carried out there. My boots, the click of the watch button, the loose zipper pull on my shell tapping against my chest. I stopped, and the woods kind of settled around me. Then I looked down and realized there were two sets of tracks beside mine, not behind me. Not crossing the trail, beside mine. Same general size, same spacing. Just offset a little to the left, like somebody had been matching my stride without stepping directly in my prints. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at them, trying to make it make sense before I even turned around. When I finally did, there was nobody on the trail, just the white path behind me, the black tree trunks, and the kind of silence that makes you feel like if someone was there, they'd be hearing you think. I'm usually good alone. That's not me trying to sound tough, I just mean I actually like it. I hike with people sometimes, sure, but if I get the choice, I'll take a solo trail over a group any day. It's cleaner in my head that way. You start at the trailhead. You settle into your pace. You pay attention to what the trail is doing and what your body's doing, and after a while it feels like all the useless noise drops out. No small talk. No stopping every 10 minutes because somebody wants a picture of a tree they could have seen online. Just the route. That day was in early winter. One of those cold Adirondack afternoons where the sky stays bright but flat, like the sun never fully commits. I was on a lesser-used trail I'd done twice before in summer. Nothing technical, but not one of the heavily trafficked routes either. In warm weather, it's a decent half-day out and back. In snow, it slows you down, but the path had enough packed coverage that I wasn't breaking trail or postholing. It was the kind of hike where you don't need to think too hard as long as you stay aware. I had my GP's watch on, same as always. I keep my hikes shared with my friend Nate mostly out of habit. He doesn't sit there actively watching a little dot move through the woods or anything. It's just one of those background safety things we started doing after a guy in our town spent a night out with a broken ankle a few winters back. I'd send Nate the route beforehand, he'd send back some dumb joke about my knees finally giving out, and that was the whole ritual. It made people feel better, including me if I'm being honest. I'd left the trailhead late enough that I knew I wasn't going all the way to the high point. That wasn't the plan. Just up to the clearing near tree line, eat something, turn around before the light got weird. I had an old green shell on, the one with the broken zipper pull I keep fixing with little loops of paracord. Thin liner gloves under heavier ones in my pack. One bottle wrapped in a wool sock so it wouldn't freeze solid. A peanut butter sandwich flattened in my jacket pocket. Really normal day. The most exciting thing that had happened up to that point was realizing I'd brought the wrong hat and my ears were colder than I wanted them to be. So when I saw the second set of tracks, my first thought wasn't anything dramatic. It was snow doing weird snow things. If you hike enough in winter, you get used to the way prints can change depending on wind, melt, refreeze, branches dropping powder into old impressions. I told myself they were older tracks that had been partly hidden and then exposed. Or maybe I'd just been unconsciously stepping near someone else's earlier line and only noticed because I'd stopped. That made sense. It was the kind of explanation that feels sturdy enough if you don't poke at it too hard. I crouched and actually looked at them. The tread pattern was blocky, not mine. Mine were pretty distinct, more worn on the outside edge. These were cleaner. But again, that didn't have to mean anything. Could have been from the morning, could have been from yesterday if the conditions held, could have been a dozen things. I remember thinking, if somebody's up ahead of me, fine. If somebody's behind me, also fine. It's a trail. People use trails. So I stood up, tightened my glove back on, and kept walking. At first, I only checked because it was there in my head. You know how once you notice something, you keep noticing it even when you tell yourself not to. I'd walk 20, 30 steps, then glance down. There they were. Same offset, same side. Not crossing mine, not drifting away, just there. My stride wasn't exactly short, and the spacing of those prints stayed close enough to mine that it made me start paying attention in a more deliberate way. I changed my pace a little, shortened it for a stretch. The offset tracks shortened too. I told myself that was impossible, which should have settled it, because when something's impossible, obviously you're reading it wrong. But instead it made me more aware of everything else. The trees, the weight of my pack, the little hiss of snow slipping from a branch somewhere out of sight. The fact that I hadn't heard another person all afternoon. I stopped again, more abruptly this time, and turned fully around. Nobody. The trail curved just enough downhill behind me that I could see a decent distance before it bent through the spruce. Nothing moved. There was no flash of color, no person stepping behind a trunk, no sound of someone catching up or backing away. My own tracks headed down the center. That second line sat beside them for a while, visible and then less visible where the light flattened everything out. I stood there long enough for the skin under my hat to start cooling. Then I felt stupid. I actually laughed once, but it came out thin. I said okay, out loud, to nobody, like I'd interrupted myself in the middle of something embarrassing. This is the part that gets annoying to explain, because people hear a detail like that and say, well, why didn't you just turn around then? But nothing had happened yet. Not really. I'd seen weird tracks. That was it. If I bailed every time Winter Woods made something look wrong, I'd spend all season in my car. So I kept going. The trail climbed more after that. The trees thinned in spots, then closed in again. I took my watch out of its normal screen and checked the route even though I didn't need to. The little breadcrumb line looked exactly like it should. My pace was steady, heart rate normal enough, battery fine. Nate's name sat there in the live tracking settings like it always did, which I found reassuring in a way that was slightly childish, like somehow being visible to a friend through a tiny satellite-assisted wrist computer meant the Woods had to keep behaving rationally. I ate half the sandwich while walking and immediately regretted it because the peanut butter had gone stiff from the cold and stuck to the roof of my mouth. I stopped to drink. The bottle was slushy at the mouth. I looked behind me again while I swallowed. Still nothing. What changed wasn't the sight of anything. It was the feeling that I was becoming aware of my own behavior in a different way. I started thinking about how I must look from behind. Like if somebody was watching me, they'd see when I checked my watch, when I reached for my bottle, when I turned my head too fast. They'd know I'd noticed something. That thought arrived fully formed, and once it did, I couldn't get rid of it. I told myself that was just because I was alone and thinking in circles. Comfortable alone doesn't mean immune to being an idiot. It just means you usually catch yourself and reset faster. I tried to do that. I focused on trail details, the packed center line, the drifted edges, a broken branch hanging low over the right side that I remembered ducking under in summer when it was covered in leaves. The slope angle, the way the snow squeaked more in the shaded sections. Then I heard a crunch behind me, one step after mine. I kept walking because sometimes if you stop too fast when something scares you, you give it more power than it deserves. That was honestly my thinking. So I took another step. Crunch. Not loud. Not close enough to be right on top of me. Just close enough that I didn't have to wonder if I'd heard it. I stopped. The woods went still. My chest didn't do anything dramatic. It just got tighter, like I'd cinched a strap across it. I listened so hard I could hear the faint dry tick of branches moving against each other higher up. I took one slow step. Crunch. Exactly one beat behind. At that point I tried to force a practical explanation. Snow falls out of branches in delayed little drops. Frozen trunks crack. Your own sound bounces weird between trees. There are lots of things that can imitate a footstep when you're already primed to hear one. I knew that. I know that now. But knowing it and believing it are two different jobs. I started testing it without wanting to admit I was testing it. I took 3 quick steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I slowed almost to a shuffle. Soft, delayed shuffles behind me. I stopped dead. Nothing. I turned again, faster this time. Nothing there. No person, no animal, no movement. Just my trail, the second trail beside it, and the quiet. I could feel the cold through the knees of my pants where the wind had picked up a little along the more open section. My fingers weren't numb, but they'd started doing that thing where they feel less precise. I pulled my gloves tighter and forced myself to breathe slower through my nose. There was still a rational part of my brain working, and I remember being almost irritated with it. It kept saying, "You haven't seen anyone. You have not actually seen anyone." Which was true. That mattered. A person can scare himself stupid in the woods if he wants to. Plenty of people do. I'd heard stories from friends who spent a whole hour convinced a stump was a crouched man or a bear because the light hit it wrong. So I made a deal with myself. I'd keep going to the clearing because I wasn't far, and if things still felt off there, I'd turn around immediately. No debate. No proving anything. That felt sensible. It felt adult. And because I had made a plan, I relaxed a little. That was probably the worst part of it. The trail opened gradually as I got closer to tree line. Not a dramatic break, just fewer thick trunks, more exposed rock buried under snow, more pale sky between branches. The air felt colder there even though I'd been climbing. My breath started drifting sideways instead of straight up. I could see the clearing ahead, that low open patch where the summer trail gives you a decent view if the weather's right. I didn't hear the delayed crunching anymore. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made the back of my neck feel tight because the sound hadn't faded naturally. It had stopped. I slowed without meaning to. My boots made that packed snow crackle, and there was nothing after them now. No echo, no branch fall. No second cadence. I remember very clearly deciding not to turn around yet. I wanted the clearing in front of me, open sight lines, no close trees. My brain had latched onto that like it was a safety feature. I stepped out into the edge of the clearing and the light changed. Everything got flatter and brighter at the same time. Wind moved loose surface snow in thin little skims over the harder crust. I took maybe 4 more steps into the open and finally turned. The second set of tracks came up the trail behind me exactly as they had for the last stretch. Then they ended. Not faded, not crossed away, not covered. Ended. About 10 feet behind where I was standing. A right print, a left print. Then nothing, no disturbed snow off to either side, no pivot, no stride turning back, no deeper hole where somebody had jumped. Just 2 fresh-looking impressions sitting in the trail behind me and open snow all around them that looked untouched. I stared at that spot so hard my eyes started watering from the cold. And right behind my left shoulder, close enough that I felt the sound more than heard it, somebody exhaled. Not a gasp, not a word, just one slow breath. Everything in my body went wrong at once. My hands stopped feeling attached properly. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I didn't look. I don't know why exactly, unless some part of me knew that if I turned and there was a face there, that would be worse than not knowing. I just stepped forward fast, then faster. Then I was walking hard down the trail without any real decision in between. The first few seconds were the worst because every nerve in me was waiting for weight to hit my back, or a hand to grab my jacket, or another breath right at my ear. Nothing happened. I kept moving. My boots slipped once on the packed section and I caught myself with one hand against a trunk. Bark scraped through my glove. I pushed off and kept going. I told myself not to run yet. People fall when they panic. That thought was weirdly clear. Don't fall. Don't break an ankle. Don't do anything that turns this into a real problem. Walk fast. Stay upright. Get to wider trail. Get to the car. Then the trail widened a little and I ran. I didn't look back. Not once. I could hear my own breathing getting ragged inside the collar of my jacket. The cold air burned the back of my throat. My watch buzzed at some point, probably an alert because my pace had changed so abruptly and the sound nearly made me lose my footing. I yanked my wrist closer to stop it from vibrating against my glove and kept going. There are chunks of that descent I only remember in pieces. A low branch I almost took to the face. The taste of metal from adrenaline in my mouth. One moment where I thought I heard steps behind me again and then couldn't tell if it was just mine bouncing off the trees. I know I cut a switchback slightly because later my track looked messy there. I know I came around a bend and saw the first faded sign near the lower junction and felt something in me unclench. Not because I was safe yet, but because I was back in terrain that felt ordinary. By the time I got to the trailhead, my hands were shaking hard enough that I missed the car key twice. The handle was so cold it felt slick. I got in, locked the doors immediately, and just sat there with my shoulders up around my ears, breathing fog into the windshield. My whole body had that drained, buzzy feeling like after you narrowly avoid a car accident and your brain keeps replaying the half-second where it could have gone differently. I still didn't check behind me. I started the car, turned the heat on full, and pulled out fast enough that my tires slipped leaving the lot. About 5 minutes down the road, once I had phone signal again, Nate texted me. Just said, "You good? Saw you turn early and then basically sprint." I stared at that message at a red light with my hands still not fully steady and typed back, "Yeah." "Trail felt off," he sent. "That's not ominous at all." I didn't answer until I was home. For a couple days I tried to downplay it to myself. Bad light, weird snowpack, auditory nonsense from being alone, a stress response to nothing. Every explanation I came up with covered part of it. but not enough. I even pulled up the route log from my watch like the data might do me a favor and flatten the whole thing into something manageable. There was my line up and back, my pace dropping near the clearing. Then that long, fast descent where I clearly bailed. Nothing on a watch file tells you what was 10 feet behind you in the snow. That's the part I can't file away. Not the sound, not even the breath, honestly. You can make yourself crazy arguing about what you heard when you were already on edge. It's the tracks. Fresh-looking tracks beside mine for that long, keeping pace, then ending in open snow with no continuation and no sign of where whoever made them could have gone. I still hike alone. People always ask that too. I do, but not that trail in winter, and not without checking over my shoulder more than I used to. Sometimes my watch still buzzes during a climb and I feel that same hard little drop in my chest before I look. What I still don't have, after going over it more times than I should, is an explanation for how a full set of footprints can follow you up a mountain and then stop about 10 feet behind you, in a patch of wind-brushed snow where there was nowhere at all left to step. Story 2. The next one happened on a much shorter night, and that's part of why it still bothers me. When he said hey, I was kneeling by the fire ring trying to get my stove back into its stuffed sack with gloves on, which was already making me mad. It had gotten dark fast, the way it does in winter where it feels like somebody pulled a shade instead of the day actually ending, and I was maybe 10 minutes from zipping myself into the tent for the night. I'd just finished heating water for instant noodles. The little pot was still giving off that salty steam smell, and the ground around me was packed snow with that crust on top that breaks if you shift wrong. So when I heard a man's voice behind me, clear and close enough that I didn't have to wonder if it was real, I actually froze with the stove half in the bag. Just hey. Calm. Not yelling, not far. I turned with my headlamp on him before I stood up, and for a second all I could see were tree trunks and the white of the beam catching falling snow dust. Then a guy stepped into the edge of the light like he'd been waiting for me to look first. He smiled, not big, just enough. And before he said anything else, I had this tiny thought I almost missed, which was that a person who was actually turned around in the woods usually starts with something practical. Trail, road, campground, direction. He didn't start with any of that. I was 23 when this happened, and if you'd asked me the week before whether I liked solo camping, I would have said I was getting into it, which was only technically true. The honest version was that I was trying really hard to become the kind of person who liked solo camping because I had just gotten out of a relationship where I felt small all the time, and I was in that stage after a breakup where every decision becomes secretly about proving a point to someone who isn't even there. My ex had this way of talking that made everything sound like a fact even when it was just his opinion. Like if I didn't want to drive a forest road at night or sleep in the middle of nowhere by myself, that didn't mean I preferred company. It meant I was not built for roughing it. He said stuff like that with a laugh, but it stuck. So after we split up, I got weirdly determined about doing things alone that I would normally have eased into more slowly with friends. That's how I ended up at a dispersed campsite in a national forest in winter with no facilities, no host, no other campers that I could see, and almost no cell service. It wasn't deep backcountry or anything. My car was down a rough spur road, maybe a short walk from where I pitched the tent, but it was still isolated enough that once the light went, the place felt very separate from the rest of the world. No bathroom lights in the distance. No voices, No someone at the next site unzipping a cooler. Just snow, trees, and the small circle of camp I'd made for myself. I'd picked that spot on purpose because I didn't want crowds. That was the story I told myself anyway. Quiet overnight, simple dinner, out early in the morning. Very healthy, very independent. I got there later than I meant to because I second-guessed the turn-off twice. By the time I set up the tent, my fingers were already stiff from messing with stakes in frozen ground. I had this cheap blue sleeping pad that kept trying to slide around under me, and I remember being irrationally annoyed at it because when you're trying not to feel alone, every minor inconvenience feels personal. Still, once I got the tent up and the fire going, I relaxed a little. The routine helped. Collect kindling, get the stove out, heat water, eat something warm. I made noodles and had one of those grocery store hot chocolates that always taste a little watery no matter what you do. My headlamp battery wasn't full, which also annoyed me, so I kept telling myself not to waste it by shining it into the woods every 5 seconds. There had been moments before dark where I almost packed it all back up and went home. I want to be honest about that. Not because I was in danger yet, just because I was uncomfortable. The kind of discomfort where every sound feels like a test you're failing. A branch drops snow. Something small moves in brush. You tell yourself this is why people do it. To get used to it. To not let your own brain push you around. I was trying really hard to be that person. Which is probably why I didn't react the way I should have when the man stepped into my light. He looked normal enough at first glance, mid-30s maybe. Knit cap, dark jacket, no huge pack that I could see. His cheeks were pink from cold, and he had that easy expression people use when they don't want to seem like a problem. "Sorry," he said. "I got turned around back there. Mind if I warm up for a second?" He glanced at my fire when he said it. I remember standing up too fast and having my knees feel shaky, which I decided was just because I'd been crouching. Yeah," I said. "Sure." Even now, that answer makes me mad. He stepped closer, but not close enough for the fire to make sense as the actual reason. If you're cold enough to ask a stranger for heat, you come into the heat. He stayed just outside that comfortable distance where I would have had to either invite him in more directly or notice that he wasn't actually interested in warming up. I told myself maybe he was trying not to crowd me. That became the whole next few minutes. Me making excuses for him faster than he had to provide them. He asked if I was out there by myself. I laughed a little and said clearly. He smiled at that. "Just for the night?" "Yeah. Heading out early. You got a car nearby?" I nodded toward the road before I even thought about it. "Anyone know where you are?" he asked. That one hit me slightly wrong, but not enough yet. People ask dumb stuff when they're nervous. People say things without thinking. I heard myself answer, "My sister does," which was not even true. I had texted a friend the general area earlier, but in that moment I wanted to sound less alone than I felt. He looked past me toward the tent. Nice setup. It was not a nice setup. It was a cheap 2-person tent and a lopsided tarp line and a foam pad from a discount outdoor store. But he said it in this considering tone, like he was taking inventory. The air had gotten colder while we were standing there. I could smell damp ash and pine sap and the weird synthetic smell my sleeping bag gives off when it first starts warming in the tent. My face was hot from the fire, but my back felt icy. I kept trying to angle myself casually so I wasn't turned away from the direction of my car. He asked how long I'd been there, what trail I came in on, if the road was passable all the way out. Little questions. Nothing you could point to one by one and say there, that's it. That's why I knew. It was the pile of them. The way they all worked together. And then I said, because I was uncomfortable and filling silence, I'm heading out pretty early anyway. I wanted to beat the snow tomorrow. His smile changed, not all the way. Just slipped for a second like he'd forgotten to wear it. He looked at me, then past me toward the trees, then back. You don't have to rush out that early. At almost the exact same moment he shifted his position. Just one step, casual enough that if you weren't paying attention it might not register. But it put him between me and the direction of the road to my car. I think my body understood before my brain did, because my mouth went dry all at once and my fingers started tingling inside my gloves. I remember looking at his jacket zipper because it was easier than looking him fully in the face. The zipper pull was missing. There was a short piece of black cord looped through it, frayed at the end. That stupid detail is burned into me. I also remember thinking, very clearly, don't let yourself panic until you know why. So I glanced past him. And that's when I saw the second person, deeper in the trees behind him outside the clean center of my headlamp beam. Just a shape at first, taller than a stump, too still to be an animal, standing where the darkness started being solid instead of broken up by branches. I couldn't make out a face. I couldn't tell what they were wearing. I just knew it was a person because of the posture. They were facing us, but not moving, not coming closer, not speaking. Waiting. Every excuse I'd made for the first guy collapsed in 1 second. He must have seen my eyes shift because he said, without turning around, you don't need to rush out tonight. That was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. He didn't threaten me. He didn't lunge. He just said it like a suggestion, while another person stood in the dark behind him like this had already been decided somewhere between them. Something hot and sick shot through my stomach. My hands suddenly felt clumsy, like they belonged to somebody else. I remember hearing the fire pop and thinking how insane it was that the fire was still just being a normal fire, while my whole brain was trying to choose between different bad options. Run right now, and he's closer. Stay here, and there are 2 of them. Go for the tent. Absolutely not. I had my car keys in the pocket of my jacket because I'd made myself keep them there after reading too many camping safety threads online. For once, one of those paranoid habits actually helped. I touched the pocket with the back of my hand just to confirm they were there. Then I said, in the calmest voice I could manage, I left my phone charging in the car. Let me grab it. It was a stupid excuse, and I knew it was stupid while I said it. There was no cord running to my car, no reason a phone would be charging out there in the cold. But I didn't have time to invent something perfect. I just needed a sentence that involved moving. He looked at me for a beat too long. Then he shrugged like it didn't matter. Sure. I started walking. Not fast, that felt important. The snow crunched under my boots, and I could hear each step too clearly. I kept my headlamp down enough that I wasn't blinding myself off the snow, but high enough that I could see the path to the road. I didn't look directly at the second person again. I could feel where they were anyway. The man behind me said, "You camp out here much?" I didn't answer. "Road's slick tonight," he said after a second. Still that same easy voice. I walked a little faster. Nobody grabbed me. Nobody ran at me. And that almost made me doubt myself for half a second, which is maybe the most dangerous thing about people like that. They leave you just enough room to feel rude, dramatic, unfair. I was maybe 15 steps from the edge of my lighted camp when the darkness closed in around me more fully and the fire stopped throwing enough glow to help. That's when I ran, not gracefully, full panic. Boots slipping on crusted snow, bag slamming against my side, breath tearing at my throat. The road to my car was short in daylight and much longer in that moment. Branches hit my sleeves. Something snagged my pant leg, and I thought for one awful second it was a hand. My keys were already out, but I still fumbled them because my fingers had stopped working right. I heard movement behind me then, not words, just the sound of somebody also moving fast. My car came into the headlamp beam like it had been dropped there. I yanked the driver's door open so hard it bounced once against the cold. I threw myself inside, locked it immediately, then hit the lock button 2 more times because I couldn't trust my hearing over my own heartbeat. A shape moved through the beam off to the side of the hood. Then another, not close enough for me to make out faces. Close enough that I knew I wasn't imagining any of it. I started the engine on the second try because the first time my foot slipped off the brake. The headlights came on and washed the trees white. Nothing there now except snow and thin trunks and the road ahead. I did not get out for any of my gear. Not the tent, not the stove, not the sleeping bag, nothing. I put the car in reverse too hard, fishtailed once, corrected, then got turned around and drove out of there with the kind of stiff posture you get when your body is still expecting impact. The forest road was rutted and half frozen. My high beams kept catching little snow flurries and making them look like things moving toward me. I was crying, which made me even angrier, because I was also trying to see. Every time I came around a bend, I expected the road to be blocked. That maybe sounds paranoid, but once you understand there were 2 of them, your brain starts inventing all the ways 2 people can work together. I didn't have service until I was back on the main road. When the bars finally popped up, I pulled onto the shoulder under this ugly orange streetlight near a closed gas station and called my friend Mara. She answered half asleep, and the second I heard another human voice, I started shaking so hard I had to put the phone on speaker and hold it in both hands. She kept asking, "Did they touch you? Did they follow you? Are you driving?" And all I could say for a while was, "There were 2 of them." There were 2 of them. I stayed at her apartment that night and drove back for my gear the next afternoon with her boyfriend and another friend in a second car because I wasn't going near that road alone. Most of it was still there. The tent had sagged because the temperature dropped overnight. The fire was just wet ash. There were tracks all over the site by then. Ours and older ones and tire marks at the spur road, and nothing about the scene gave me anything useful. It just looked like a campsite someone had left in a hurry, which was exactly what it was. For a while I got embarrassed telling it because on paper it sounds like maybe nothing happened. A man spoke to me. Another person was in the woods. I drove away. Fine, but that's only how it reads if you take each part separately and strip out the thing that mattered, which was the feeling of being assessed, then positioned, then quietly closed in on. Nobody had to say what was wrong. By the time I saw that second person standing back in the trees, I already knew. I still camp, but I don't do dispersed sites alone anymore. Maybe that means I proved nothing. I don't care. There are some lessons that are too expensive if you insist on learning them the hard way. It took me a while to admit that part of why I stayed polite with him for as long as I did was because I didn't want to look scared. I didn't want to be the girl overreacting in the woods. I would rather be rude for the rest of my life than worry about that again. What I keep coming back to isn't even the guy who spoke to me. It's the one behind him. The person who stayed completely still outside the light, saying nothing, letting the first man do all the talking. I still think about how deliberate that was, and what exactly they had planned for the moment I stopped being able to leave. Story 3. The last story in this video is the one that unsettled me the most. Mostly because I still can't convince myself it was random. The first thing I noticed was the condensation out of the tailpipe. Not because that's a strange thing to see in winter, obviously. It was just there, pulsing steadily at the far end of the lot where there hadn't been a vehicle when I started the exercise. Headlights off, engine running, parked nose in near the snowbank. I was carrying a radio case in one hand and my pack in the other, and I stopped long enough to clock the make and the approximate position out of habit before I kept moving. That's normal for me. I've been with volunteer search and rescue for years. You spend enough nights at trailheads and logging roads and staging areas, you get used to reading scenes quickly. What vehicles are present? What paths are open? Where your light is reflecting from? Who looks cold versus who looks wrong? The car itself didn't bother me much at first. What bothered me was that when a man got out and asked if I had jumper cables, he stayed too far away to be somebody who actually needed them. I'm in my 40s now, and being alone in the dark has been part of my routine for a long time, just usually with a reason and a radio attached to it. Search work teaches you a strange kind of comfort. You stop reacting to the fact that it's nighttime or that the woods are empty, because those are conditions, not threats. You learn the difference between a problem you can solve and a problem you haven't identified yet. You learn what your own stress cues feel like. At least you hope you do. That evening we'd finished a winter training exercise just after dusk. Nothing dramatic, just navigation work and a mock search area near a closed park. We had permission to use the trailhead lot even though the place was technically shut for the season. A few of the others had left earlier from the main access road. I stayed behind because I was packing group gear into my truck and doing the little cleanup things that always fall to whoever is least in a hurry. Roll the litter tarp, make sure no flagging tape got left out. Check the batteries in one of the loaner radios. Boring stuff. By the time I walked back to my truck, the lot was mostly dark except for the spill of my own headlamp and the dull wash from the road about 100 yards away through the trees. Public space, technically. Not remote in the way people imagine wilderness, but after hours in winter, with the gate closed and the snowbanks pushed up at the edges, it felt empty in a very specific way. Visible but not occupied. If someone yelled, there was a chance a passing driver might hear it. There was also a very good chance they wouldn't understand what they'd heard and keep going. My truck had been the only vehicle there when we started. That mattered to me later. I know it for a fact because I'd parked in the center row to leave room for team access, and I remember looking at the lot and thinking how nice it was not to have random hikers ignoring the seasonal closure for once. I work methodically when I'm alone. Same order most times. Radio case in the cab. Pack in the back seat. Gloves on the console. Headlamp stays on until engine's running. Keys clipped to the right side belt loop or in my jacket chest pocket. never floating loose. That's not paranoia. It's just what happens when you do enough night operations that little habits become muscle memory. I was halfway through loading gear when I noticed the second vehicle still idling. It was positioned at the far end of the lot with no interior light on, which meant either the driver had already been sitting there a while or they were intentionally keeping things dim. I remember the engine note more than the shape of the car. Slight roughness in the idle. Older sedan, maybe. Hard to say over winter air. My first explanation was simple. Pickup. Somebody late, maybe waiting for a hiker who shouldn't still be out there. Then the driver got out. He called over, "Hey, you got jumper cables?" His tone was casual. Too casual maybe, but casual enough that I answered without much delay. "I've got a battery pack. What's going on?" He started walking toward me, then stopped well short of the distance where a person with a dead battery usually wants to be. If your car won't start on a cold night, you close ground quickly. You want help before it disappears. He seemed content to keep space between us. "Won't turn over," he said. I straightened up from the truck bed and looked toward his car. No hood up, no attempt to show me the problem. No one behind the wheel trying the ignition. That nudged me, but only slightly. People are often disorganized when they want help. I've spent enough time around stranded hikers to know that. I said, "I can grab the pack in a second." "Appreciate it," he said, and smiled. The smile wasn't the issue. The issue was that while I was looking at him, I saw movement in the reflection of my own truck window. Not behind him, behind me. A second figure, low and quick, coming around the opposite side of the truck from the rear quarter. I didn't turn immediately. That was training, or maybe just instinct. Reflections give you a little more information if you don't break the angle too soon. I shifted the gear tote in my hands like I was making room and took one step along the side of my truck instead, opening my position so I could see both the man in front of me and the shape in the glass. Definitely another person. That was the first real spike. Not fear exactly, more like a hard internal click where the situation moves from undefined to active. Two people, unknown intent, using opposite approaches. That's different from a guy with car trouble. Still, there was room for explanation. Partner got out to help. Partner's nervous. Partner's drunk. People do odd things in parking lots at night. A lot of them aren't criminal, just awkward. That was honestly where my head went first, because if you work rescue long enough, you learn not to escalate strangers unnecessarily. Most weird behavior comes with a stupid explanation. So I stepped around the front corner of my truck and put the vehicle between myself and the second person. It was a deliberate move, nothing dramatic, just changing my angle. The second person adjusted instantly. I saw it in the windshield reflection and then directly a fraction later. They mirrored me around the opposite side without a word. Same pace, same intent, not wandering, not hesitating. That took away one more explanation. The man by the sedan gave a little shrug like we were all just existing in the same cold lot by coincidence. "Battery's been acting up for a week," he said. I said. I kept my voice even, which I'm glad about now. People talk about fear like it arrives all at once. For me, it didn't. It came in stages, and each stage sharpened rather than overwhelmed. I noticed the smell of my own truck exhaust. I noticed one lace on my left boot had come slightly untucked and was slapping the snow when I moved. I noticed the second person had their hands in their jacket pockets, which can mean nothing or can mean they don't want you to know what their hands are doing. What I also noticed was how exposed I was. Open lot. Snow glare. Road nearby, but not nearby enough. Anyone passing would see a truck, a car, and 3 people in winter clothing. Nothing about that screams help. I said hang on and set the gear tote into the truck bed without taking my eyes fully off them. That gave me a second to think. Options. Get in and leave. Make noise now. Keep the truck between us until they either commit or get bored. Reach for the panic button before I need it, not after. The best part of training is not courage. It's that you've practiced not wasting time on bad choices. The second man, if it was a man, I still can't say for certain, drifted a little closer to the driver's side. Not closing hard, just occupying space that should have been clear. The first man took 2 more steps toward the front of my truck. I shifted with them. Again, the second person mirrored. That was the spiral of it. Every time I thought maybe I was reading too much into ordinary behavior, they did one more precise thing that made ordinary behavior harder to argue for. Then there'd be a half second where nothing happened, and I'd think maybe that's all it is. Just weird people in a parking lot. Then another adjustment, another angle closed, another little coordinated movement with no words exchanged. I tried one more verbal test. You mind giving me some room? I said, not loud. The first man lifted both hands chest high like I'd accused him of something unreasonable, just asking for a jump. The second person said nothing. That silence did more than any threat would have. A normal companion would have spoken by then. Even one sentence. Sorry, we're cold. Can you help? Something. Instead, they kept working off each other's position like there'd already been a conversation before I ever came back to the lot. I took a couple steps toward the rear of my truck as if I were going for the battery pack in the back seat instead of the cab. They adjusted again. The first man slowed to keep me in front of him. The second slid closer along the driver's side zone, staying just outside arm's reach. No rush, which was almost worse. It meant they weren't improvising, they were comfortable. For a second, I got a small release because headlights from the road flashed through the trees and lit the lot in passing. I thought, good, visibility. Let them know they're seen. But the car on the road never slowed. The light moved on, and the lot felt emptier after it passed than it had before. That's the thing about public places after hours. Help exists conceptually. That doesn't mean it arrives. I made the decision then to get in immediately if there was any opening. Battery pack didn't matter. Politeness didn't matter. If these people really needed a jump, they could call roadside assistance like everyone else. I shifted the keys into my hand inside my jacket pocket and moved toward the driver's door. For 1 second, it looked like I had it. The angle was clean enough. The second person had drifted half a step too wide. I pulled the handle, and both of them moved. Fast. The first man closed the distance from the front corner in a burst that felt completely different from his earlier casual pace. No stumble, no hesitation, just straight at me. At the exact same time, the second person reached the driver's side area before I could get fully into the seat. Not grabbing me, not shouting, just taking the door space in one coordinated motion. They never said a word to each other. That was the moment the last doubt went out of it. I drove my shoulder backward instead of into the cab, creating space, and hit the panic alarm on my key fob. The horn erupted across the lot. Lights flashed. I started yelling immediately, not words at first, just volume. stepping back away from the truck so I wouldn't get pinned against it. Then actual words. Back off. Back off. The sound bounced off the snowbanks and the closed gate and came back harsher. My own voice sounded strange in the cold air. The first man stopped short. The second peeled away from the door and turned their head toward the road. Headlights appeared through the trees almost instantly after that. Probably a coincidence of timing, but it felt like a rescue anyway. A pickup on the road slowed enough that the beams swept the entire lot instead of just glancing past. In that moving wash of light, both of them broke. No argument. No last attempt to explain. They turned and went straight back to their sedan. Doors slammed. Engine revved. The car pulled out hard and headed toward the access road without ever flashing lights or rolling a window down. By the time I got close enough to see the plate clearly, they were already angling out and I caught only part of it. Not enough to be useful in the dark with my truck horn blaring and my pulse trying to punch its way into my throat. The pickup on the road didn't actually turn in. It slowed, then kept going once the sedan left. I don't blame them for that. From a distance, it probably looked like some loud argument in a parking lot. But it's worth saying because people imagine public danger differently. They imagine witnesses as solutions. Usually they're just lights moving past. I shut off the alarm with hands that were steady enough to function and not steady enough to feel normal. That's another thing training does. It lets you work while your body is still catching up. I got in the truck, locked the doors, started the engine, then called it in. Sheriff first, then one of our team coordinators, because if somebody was working that lot after dark, we needed to warn the rest of the group immediately. While I was on the phone, I watched the access road in the mirrors the whole time. No one came back. A deputy met me farther down near the highway turnout. I gave the best description I could, which did not feel like enough. Man in dark jacket, average build, average height. Second person, similar dark outerwear, moved quickly, didn't speak. Older sedan, dark color, partial plate. The deputy asked if they had threatened me directly or made physical contact. I said no. He asked if they asked for money or property. I said no. He asked if I thought maybe they were just trying to get a ride or startle me. I remember looking at him and saying, very evenly, 2 people tried to take opposite sides of my vehicle and keep me from getting into it. Call that whatever category works for your report. To his credit, he stopped pushing after that. I drove home with all the windows locked and the radio off. My gloves still smelled like wet nylon and truck exhaust. There was dried mud on one knee from kneeling during training earlier, and for some reason that detail made the whole night feel more real than anything else. You can spend hours preparing to find a missing person in rough weather and still end up having the only real emergency of the evening happen in a parking lot next to your own truck. What stayed with me wasn't just that they moved on me. It was how little wasted motion there was. No drunken bravado, no argument, no discussion between them. The first man created a harmless reason to approach. The second used my blind side and the reflections off my truck. When I repositioned, they repositioned. When I went for the door, they were already committed. That kind of cooperation doesn't come out of nowhere. We changed some of our routine after that. Nobody leaves that lot alone after dark now if it can be avoided. We pair up for gear loading. We keep vehicle descriptions on departure logs when we're using seasonal closures. It's not paranoia. It's just responding to data, and I count myself as data now whether I like it or not. The lot itself is still there. Closed gate in winter, snowbanks, road noise drifting in from the highway, same faded signs about seasonal access. I've been back since, because avoiding a place forever gives it more of you than it deserves. But I don't treat that parking lot like a neutral space anymore. None of us do. And what I can't stop thinking about is how smoothly they worked without speaking, like they had already run through that exact approach enough times that words would only slow them down. Which makes me wonder how many other people pulled into that lot alone after dark and saw a car idling with the headlights off before realizing too late it was waiting for them.